class. Hopefully everything's going well for you out there. Over the last week, you've been looking at cases primarily dealing with the Fifth through Eighth Amendment as we kind of look at these Bill of Rights cases. You know, we've gone through the First and the Fourth Amendment for the most part. And so this week it was 5 through 8. All right. So the Fifth Amendment, of course, there's a ton of things in the Fifth Amendment. You know, in the homework I had you list, 5 things that the Fifth Amendment guarantees you, and we're going to touch upon a couple of those. One of those, of course, is double jeopardy, the idea that you can't be charged with the same crime twice. That's a protection we have against government. Second idea, of course, is the right to counsel. That you have the right to a lawyer if you need to have one. And of course, a third one is the idea that you don't have to be a witness against yourself, that you do not have to say anything or try to prove your innocence. All right, it's up to the state to prove your guilt. All right, so you can plead the Fifth, as many people say it on TV. I plead the Fifth means, again, that you use your Fifth Amendment right to remain silent, that anything you say you think will be incriminating potentially or turned against you, and so you do not have to do that. And of course, the big case that revolves around this is Miranda versus Arizona. And in the Miranda case, what we find out here is that Miranda was charged with rape and murder. And what happens here is under intense interrogation, Miranda confesses. And so obviously he's going to be found guilty, he's going to be sent to prison, but his lawyer argues that it was the interrogation that prompted the confession, and had Miranda known that he was entitled to a lawyer and to not have to self-incriminate, that the outcome may have been different, that he may not have confessed this, that the onus would have been on the state to prove his guilt. And so the lower courts kind of dismissed that idea, but once it got to the Supreme Court did reverse the decision and say that yes, we are, as individuals, if we are ever convicted or brought in for questioning, need to be told what our rights are. And you may have heard the Miranda rights before on TV, especially cop shows, in which you hear the police officer say you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say may be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you can't afford one, of course it goes on from there. But those are the Miranda rights, and it comes out of this case. So it's a very, very important case that kind of, again, solidified our rights as individuals in regards to the police power that the state has and kind of where we fit into that. All right, so then a second case that you were supposed to look at kind of deals more with the Sixth Amendment and the idea of counsel. Now, of course, you have the right to a jury trial in a criminal case, but do you have the right to be afforded counsel, all right, if you can't afford one? And of course, this kind of piggybacks with the Fifth Amendment and the Miranda rights. This is Gideon versus Wainwright. And in the case of Gideon versus Wainwright, the idea here is that if you cannot afford a lawyer, you then are going to be appointed one. All right, the state needs to provide you adequate counsel so that, again, you have the ability to defend yourself in a court, and you're not up there just by yourself trying to defend yourself. That it tries to level the playing field a little bit as far as those cases go. So Miranda versus Arizona, Gideon versus Wainwright were two really big cases that kind of deal with the rights of the accused. All right. So after sentencing and on capital cases in which involve the death penalty, we have the Eighth Amendment, that we cannot, excessive fines and bail are part of that. And then secondly, of course, is no cruel or unusual punishment. And so when we start looking at the Eighth Amendment, there's two cases here that kind of help define that. Because not all states have the death penalty. It is kind of a states' rights issue. And so some states do, like in Ohio, we have had the death penalty and currently do. And then other states do not. All right. And so the first case that we look at is Thompson versus Oklahoma. All right, so back in 1988, this case was heard, Thompson versus Oklahoma, and what they did in that case is they charged a 15-year-old as an adult, tried him for murder, and convicted him to death. And so it gets all the way up to the Supreme Court on appeals, and the Supreme Court hears it and says, you know what, to execute a 15-year-old for murder is cruel and unusual. that that's just too young for a state to execute an individual for a capital punishment. So what they ended up doing is setting a limit, an age of 16 for execution. All right, so if 16 and under, nope, you can't. Anything above 16, you can. So that kind of set the stage. Well, then the next case that we look at is Roper versus Simmons. And in that case, they will readjust the age to 18. All right, 17-year-old plots a murder. I mean, this is what he was basically thinking. Well, if I do it before I'm 18, they won't give me the chair. They won't execute me. And so he plots a murder. And even though I think if I get my case right, he had plotted to murder his neighbor. I think he had kind of got his friends involved in this. And of course, he will be convicted of this because he pretty much confesses to it. And so they try him as an adult, and they were going to execute him. And this began in 1993, but the case will not be decided until 2005. And in that case, when they finally decided in the Supreme Court, they said, no, 18-year-old and above, to be tried as an adult, you must be legally an adult. And so that kind of reset the death penalty to 18 years old. Okay, and obviously there's been other cases since that kind of look at what's cruel and unusual and this, that, and the other. But those are the two that kind of had defined the age limit in regards to capital punishment if a state wishes to use the death penalty. All right, and so those are the cases again that you were kind of focusing on this week. It kind of takes us up through the end of the Bill of Rights. And so what the next set of cases will be about next week is going to be pretty much regarding around the 14th Amendment, the Due Process Clause, and in particular looking at kind of discrimination, affirmative action, and those type of things. So hopefully you guys have a good weekend, and looking forward to seeing you guys soon.